Do you want to know which personality types are the most compatible with you when it comes to friendships, work, family life, best friends, especially also those that are suited to your personality and not just successful or interesting in some other way? Then keep watching this video. Hey, welcome back to Typevolution, where we talk about how to evolve with our personality type. I'm Olympia, and this video is specifically about the social compatibility with the Jungian personality types. So these are the so-called 16 personality types, or also known as MBTI or known as Socionics. And as you might know, I am basically kind of combining MBTI and Socionics in my advice, mostly focusing on Socionics, and it's all based on the Jungian personality types. So here we go into the functions. And yeah, you might wonder, okay, what kind of personality is compatible with you as a friend or as a co-worker or as a family member? And that really depends on different factors. Now, in this video, I still follow the main recommendation or idea of the cognitive functions and the cognitive values, having them the same. And I described that more and explained that more in the previous video. But here there are a couple of exceptions to that general rule, because especially as you zoom out and you have more and more people involved, it really shifts the dynamic or priorities a little bit. It's kind of like, well, how the entire humanity as we are right now, we have all the 16 personalities, we have all kinds of functions in our human society as a whole, right? And that's because we zoom out, and that's because we have all these different purposes and purpose roles based on our personality types, as I also talked about in another video. So the bigger your group is, the further out you go, the more you zoom out, the more it becomes advantageous to include all kinds of different personalities. So I'm gonna go into that right now. Like work, especially if it's a big company, the bigger your company is and the more varied your roles are, the more you will have the need for different personality types. So that would mean having basically almost all personality types at your work. But this only is really the case if it's a huge company and if the company has a lot of varied roles in them. So then you will have the need for different personality types to fulfill all these different roles. If the company is smaller, or if there's only one really specific task that you have to do, it goes more into the other points. But if it's like a really big one, like really huge, maybe like Disney or something like that, then you can benefit from all different personality types. In this case, this is the exception where I would actually say it is probably a good idea to even have all the different, in Socionics, quadras, or just all the different functions in it, you know? But when we go into the next, almost the next point, well, okay, pretty much the next point, when I say casual hanging out and hanging out around a hobby, this is almost similar to having a smaller work group. Like if you're in a group, a small work group, you can have that at work, and you can have that at a casual hangout, like a larger friend group, like acquaintances, where it goes larger, but it's still not as large. In that case, I would not necessarily say you should have all kinds of different personalities. It becomes a bit more specific here. Still, you can have all the different functions in there. But what emerges is the natural compatibility and attractiveness between certain groups of people. So in Socionics, it's called clubs. So this is where NFs migrate together, so to speak, where STs get together, SFs, and NTs. So this is what happens once the group gets smaller. You are not like this huge society anymore. It gets smaller, and then you see these migrations towards similar interests, because these personalities usually have similar interests. And also what you see is certain groups becoming mostly about like not just NF, but also like NF-ST, because they are also very compatible with each other. They provide each other with complementary viewpoints. So this can create interesting discussions as well. So like if your hobby is, for example, movies, and you meet up and go to the movies and then you talk about the movies, or you're like a book club or something like that, this is where it becomes really great to have more variation as well, but not too far of a variation as in the previous point. So in that case, as I said, NF-ST, then SF and NT also usually migrate and kind of get together. So that's what can happen in like bigger friend groups, or like casual hanging out, acquaintances, talking about a hobby. And it also depends on, of course, what the exact hobby is. Some hobbies are more centered around like a specific cognitive function. Like usually a lot of sports are more basically revolving around sensing. So you will most likely find more people of like a sensing background, like having stronger sensing, like S-types basically. But sometimes also other types go there. Sometimes certain NFs or NTs are intrigued and kind of want to develop themselves in that area, so then they might also go there. Okay, but once again, it kind of depends. They also revolve around, like I said, either sensing or intuition or feeling or thinking, right? So that's also what can happen. It actually can be advantageous because you will have all the different kinds of viewpoints, and we need all different functions in our society to have a balance in a way, right? So this is where it's advantageous. Okay, but once we come to the close friend group or a family, I would say close friend group and family are kind of the same thing, especially if you have a background where your family is really problematic and you want to create like a new family, or you want to create your own group in a sense, so then a closer friend group that it's more like a family. In this case, then I really go back to my previous video where I tell you, okay, you should probably go to same quadra, aka the same valued functions, not necessarily in the same order, but having the same function. So that means if you know functional theory, that would mean like everyone valuing extroverted feeling, introverted thinking, extroverted sensing, introverted intuition, for example. That would be like one group. And you can have that with all the other different types as well, like all the other groups. So then it's really better to share all the same cognitive functions. Like I said, the problem with family is you cannot, like the family you come from, you cannot change that. And oftentimes the family you come from, there are incompatible personality types in the mix. So that's why it can be better to create your own friend group or your own quote-unquote family. But once again, like it's, I guess, like the trick of genetics, like I suppose, because when we procreate, our, I suppose, biology has a greater agenda. It's not just about our personal preferences and well-being, but it's about like society as a whole. So in that case, your family will usually have different types in there that are not complementary with each other, but in the greater, from the greater good perspective, these personality types are also needed, right? But if you're an adult, if you want to create your preferred group, closer group, then if you know the personality types, that can help a lot. And if you center it around one specific quadra. Having said that, this is also where I would say secondary place would be adjacent quadras, meaning where you share half of the same cognitive functions. Like I said, in a close friend group and in a family dynamic, this would be also good. It's not as great as having all the same cognitive functions, but it's still pretty good if you have, you know, people from other kinds of backgrounds in terms of personality type. So I would still say this can still be a good thing. You will have more variation, you will have still interesting viewpoints without being too far removed, because the problem is if you try to be close with people who have opposite cognitive values, this can be really irritating. And like I said, the closer you get, the better it is that it suits your specific personality type. So yeah, this is why still having like the half functions the same is still good enough for a closer friend group or family. But then when we come to best friends, then it becomes also more problematic. It depends. It depends on how close you are with your best friend, so to speak. So with best friends, I really go back to my previous video of romantic compatibility, because with a best friend you are also closer, but it's still not as intense, let's say, as with a romantic partner, because the difference really is with a friend, even if it's like a best friend or a close friend, you don't necessarily try to merge your lives together, right? You're not really trying to create something together per se. Sometimes some people are doing that, okay? There are close friends who do that, but there's still generally way more tolerance of a different kind of personality, simply because, yeah, you're not really trying, like, I guess in the stereotypical sense, not trying to become one, right? So there's just way more leeway. So I would still, it's still best if it's the same cognitive functions, the same valued cognitive functions, the order does not matter as much. But still, I want to point out, so in the previous video, I expressed that at least my preference in terms of recommendations, also in my own preference, having a partner who's more complementary in a romantic match is probably more advantageous. But when it comes to friendships, I found that many people do very well with having a best friend who is very close to their own personality. So the closest would be the same personality type. It's really pleasant having like someone who really gets it, so to speak. And that's mostly someone who has the same personality type as you. And also, as a side note, probably also the same gender and sexual orientation as you. So that's when it really becomes really easy to relate to each other. So best friend, I would I would recommend the same personality type the most, followed by the other 3 types that I mentioned in my previous video, which are, you know, based on the same cognitive functions. And then, like, further removed, as I said, you can still have like a close friend or best friend who has like half of the same cognitive functions. But this is not my top recommendation, and this depends a lot also on other compatibility markers, as like also when it comes to personality types. So I also made videos about the compatibility of the instinctual stackings, and I might also make a video about compatibility of the Enneagram types. So these also play a role. Like, you have to combine all of this to really get to the most compatible personality type result, so to speak. I mentioned in the previous video how you should avoid one type specifically. When it comes to friendships, you can even be kind of friendly, let's say, with a very incompatible personality type. But there is a limit to some extent. So I would say the limit comes when it goes to best friend or closest friends. That's usually where it diverges too far. But when it comes to work, co-workers, casual hanging out, and like a casual way, friend group where you don't meet as often and it's really specific to a particular hobby, in those cases, I saw that even like these, in Socionics, conflictor types can get along, because they are just talking about a specific topic, usually a specific task, and it doesn't go into the personal lives. You're not trying to create a life together, basically. You're not trying to merge or get close, so that's fine. So you have way more leeway when it comes to social compatibility and personality type. But still, especially if you go to closer friend group, closer bonds, and also best friends and things like that, then it still matters a lot. So I would say, yeah, personality type matters, especially if you found that even though they are like interesting people around you, or you see people who are really successful or who are really attractive, but you don't really get along that well, it can be personality type related. Of course, it can also be related to the person's mental health and how evolved they are as a personality type, and I talk about that more when I go into the light and dark sides of the personality types. So basically, you could come across people who technically have a compatible personality type, but because they are so far removed from their evolved version, they are too devolved, they're not mature enough, you could say, or evolved enough, then you could still kind of clash with that person. So you have to keep that in mind. But if your kind of personal evolutions are kind of on the same wavelength and you still clash, then, or you still kind of don't really get like this bond going, then it's probably because the personality types just don't match. Like, it's just not that intriguing, it's just not that compatible. So in that case, it's really good to know about these personality types. So if you're wondering, okay, how can I figure out what my personality type is, what the personality types of other people are, you can look at some of my other videos where I also go into voice typing. But the surest way and the most direct way would be to book a typing session with me. So I can type you, and in speed typing, I can also type people that you know, if you give me enough information. So that also includes pictures, maybe even videos, things like that. Of course, also like telling me what they are about, and maybe showing me some social media accounts of them and so forth. But yeah, so this will really improve your social life a lot if you have more of a focus on these personality types. So yeah, okay, that's all I can say for today, and see you in the next video. Bye.